Eh bien, bonjour à tous. Welcome everyone, live à l'Université de Montréal ce matin. Je me présente, McGill Sinatra, le directeur fondateur du Centre de recherche interuniversitaire sur les mathématiques numériques, basé à l'Université de Montréal. Et c'est mon grand plaisir de vous accueillir ce matin, en présence et virtuellement pour tous ceux qui sont avec nous en ligne, à cet événement en l'honneur de Stéfan Sinclair. This is a bilingual event. Kim Martin's lecture will be in English. There will be a roundtable this afternoon, presentations in English and in French, and words of welcome this morning in French and in English as well. Et comme vous le savez pour le programme, c'est mon grand plaisir de demander d'abord à mon doyen Frédéric Bouchard de venir nous dire quelques mots de bienvenue.
Merci, Michael. D'abord, mes salutations à la famille de Stéfan Sinclair qui profite de cet événement à distance. J'en profite pour saluer ma collègue Mary Hunter, doyenne de la Faculté des arts de McGill. Un plaisir de revoir Suzanne Talon, directrice générale de Calcul Québec. Et un salut particulier aussi aux conférencières et conférenciers pléniers, ainsi que tous les participants. Donc, j'en mentionnerai quelques-uns. Kim Martin, Susan Brown, Diane. Là, je m'excuse pour la prononciation des noms de famille. C'est de l'ignorance. Jacques Aki. Oui, une chance sur 10. Geoffrey Rockwell, Stéphane Pouliot et Marcello Vitali-Rosati. Je salue aussi Antoine Fauchier, coordonnateur étudiant qui a aidé à organiser la journée. Donc, chers collègues, chers étudiants, bonjour à toutes et tous. On est ravis de vous avoir parmi nous aujourd'hui. C'est un privilège pour moi de vous souhaiter la bienvenue pour cette première conférence annuelle qui rend hommage à Stéfan Sinclair. Cet événement est organisé par le CRIHN avec le soutien du Carrefour en culture et création numérique de la Faculté des arts et des sciences. Donc, Stéfan Sinclair, professeur agrégé au département des langues, des littératures et des cultures de l'Université McGill, a été un des membres fondateurs du CRIHN qui organise cet événement. Ma collègue Mary aura l'occasion de dire quelques mots aussi. Vous nous pardonnerez la redite, mais comme c'est une journée en son honneur, on veut s'assurer de souligner des faits saillants de sa carrière. Donc, c'est Stéfan Sinclair, j'ai mentionné, un des membres fondateurs du CRIHN en 2013, spécialiste des humanités numériques, de l'analyse et de la visualisation de textes, mais aussi grand concepteur de différents outils en sciences humaines, qui a grandement participé à, sinon la naissance, la croissance du secteur des humanités numériques. Et pour citer quelques exemples majeurs de son implication, il a été président de l'Association of Computers and Humanities, vice-président de l'ancêtre de la Canadian Society for Digital Humanities, la Société canadienne des humanités numériques, l'un des rédacteurs en chef de Digital Humanities Quarterly, créateur de Voyant, une série d'outils d'analyse de texte, et un des membres fondateurs du groupe de recherche sur les éditions critiques en contexte numérique, le GRET. Stéfan Sinclair ne fut pas seulement un créateur d'outils, mais a aussi fait avancer la réflexion sur le développement et l'interprétation des technologies numériques. Donc, je dirais, et là, comme je ne participe pas, au scholarship en humanité numérique, vous pardonnerez d'en offrir ici un regard, je dirais, extérieur, et je dirais, je ne vais pas essayer de le vulgariser parce que ça serait vulgaire, mais mentionner que l'importance des lettres et sciences humaines, arts, lettres et sciences humaines, a toujours été constitutif du projet universitaire, mais c'est aussi sa responsabilité de pointer ses évolutions actuelles et ses évolutions à venir. Et c'est ici que les humanités numériques ont été particulièrement importantes pour repenser à qu'est-ce que la réflexion universitaire peut regarder et peut offrir. Ces recommandations ne sont pas, je dirais, homogènes. Donc, le secteur regarde, disons, cette évolution récente d'une manière, je dirais, très diversifiée. Et c'est quelque chose qu'on constate, je dirais, avec, je dirais, enthousiasme et fierté au sein de notre faculté. Le CRIHN est un exemple de ce processus de réflexion et je le souligne, il réunit 8 universités avec des collèges, ainsi que des collèges et des établissements de recherche et rassemble plus de 80 chercheurs de différents domaines comme la littérature, le cinéma, les langues, la communication, l'histoire, la philosophie, la bibliothéconomie, les sciences de l'information, l'histoire de l'art, le design et l'informatique. Et si j'ai oublié votre discipline, veuillez m'en pardonner. Donc, pour notre faculté, je le mentionne, c'est quelque chose de fondamental. Je dirais, il n'est pas plus ou moins important que d'autres disciplines, mais il offre un prisme nouveau. Et ça, c'est important parce que nous, ce qu'on veut, c'est offrir à nos étudiants et à la société ces prismes qui permettent de voir, d'appréhender la culture et l'évolution de la société à travers, je dirais, un regard nouveau et mieux éclairé. C'est d'autant plus important qu'on souhaite ensuite que ces mêmes étudiants et chercheurs ne soient pas juste éclairés, mais qu'ils soient éclairants. Et donc, c'est quelque chose de précieux pour nous. Et je dirais, on parle bien sûr là, je dirais, de l'évolution de différentes industries. Puis je dirais, c'est vrai, c'est important, qui utilisent, qui consomment, qui transforment le numérique. Mais au-delà de ça, c'est de comprendre en quoi l'expérience humaine reste la même et en quoi elle change. Et ça, je dirais, je souligne que le mot le plus important dans l'humanité numérique, ça reste humanité. Je dirais, le numérique dit plus sur le moment et les manières, mais je dirais le vaisseau qui fait ce voyage-là reste le même. Et je suis ravi de voir au sein des conférences, dans votre programme, mais au sein des activités du CRIHN, de voir que, bien sûr, il y a cette appropriation et cette réflexion critique sur les outils, mais que la réflexion sur la portée humaniste de ce projet-là reste entière et plus actuelle que jamais. Donc, sur ce, je dirais, encore une fois, je salue la famille de Stéfan Sinclair et tous les collègues qui ont pu, je dirais, bénéficier non seulement de ses lumières, mais aussi de sa compagnie. Et à toutes et tous, je vous souhaite un très bel événement. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Frédéric. Et donc, j'invite maintenant la doyenne de la Faculté des Arts de McGill, Maryland.
Thank you very much, Michael, for inviting me here today. It is my pleasure to be here today to celebrate the important contributions of Professor Stéfan Sinclair made to the academic community in Montreal, particularly in the digital humanities. I did not know Stéfan personally, but have only heard wonderful things from his friends and colleagues. When I told them that I was coming today, it was wonderful to hear all these stories about him. Stéfan joined McGill in the Department of Languages, Literatures, and Cultures in 2011, and was charged by the provost with the task of advancing the field of digital humanities at McGill. As the co-creator of a widely used online tool, Doyen, and the author of many significant publications, he was well placed to carry out this project. When he arrived at McGill, he joined a newly amalgamated department. And as we all know, this is no easy feat, yet he rose to the challenge. In fact, one of his colleagues told me recently that Stéfan hosted the very first social event for the department. And this was a great gesture of collegiality, friendship, and openness that was greatly appreciated and admired by his colleagues. McGill continues to build in digital humanities from the crucial foundation laid by Stéfan. And we are grateful for the leadership of his colleagues, as well as new professors in digital humanities at McGill, such as Cecily Rayner, Andrew Piper, Richard So, amongst others, who have all continued to push and expand Stéfan's work. I'm also happy to report of some new digital humanities initiatives in the Faculty of Arts. So we have proposed a one-year master's in digital humanities that's currently with the Quebec government. So I know people here, just please keep your fingers crossed for us. We are also developing a minor in DH at the undergraduate level. And here we're hoping that this will bring together various DH initiatives that are across both the faculty, the university, and of course, others working in DH across the city. And I'm also pleased to let people know that we currently have a cohort of 10 excellent students in our 2-year MA program. And I know the professors are really thrilled to be working with them. So thank you again for inviting me today. And I look forward to learning more about what's going on in DH. Thank you.
Merci Frédéric, merci Mary pour vos mots de bienvenue ce matin. And now it's my great pleasure to sort of introduce Kim Martin very briefly. And in particular, when I was discussing with Marcello Vitelli-Rosati and Jason Kamlott, who are the other 2 co-founders of the center, when Stéfan and I talked about when he arrived in 2011 about like, we need to bring together the universities to do something together. The idea of putting the center together was like put forward, launched in 2030, new members added. I see like other friends and colleagues, Emmanuel Chateau-Duquier being in the room with us today, who joined when you arrived in 2015. And one of the things that when sadly Stéfan passed away, and I was talking with Liz and Grant, Stéfan's parent, and his sister Natalie, and Stephanie, his wife, about honoring him with a lecture with the center was the thing that came to mind to all of us here at the CRIHN. We decided that the best way to show how Stéfan was always so wonderfully supportive of junior scholars. He took always extreme like amount of time to meet people, help grad students sort of work his way. He never had that kind of slightly superior attitude that some people have in the academia, on the contrary. And when we thought how to best honor him with a lecture annually would be to bring one of these sort of early career junior with like great faculty, great opportunity, but also a way of looking at the DH world that sort of stands apart. And in my mind, Kim Martin was the first name that came to my mind as I was like chatting with Suzanne Brown about like, would she be okay with that? Because it's also like pressure to be the first one to deliver that lecture, but no pressure, Kim. And she said yes, to my great pleasure. Kim Martin, I'm sure most of you know, is an assistant professor at the University of Guelph in the history department and has been working with Suzanne in a think lab at the library there, but also you've heard of her with the Busmaker Initiative, and she's, with a Links project. Kim's name floats around lots of people. Alex Gill at Columbia and her were like partners in crime for a while, and I sort of wave hello to Alex up there. So without further ado, please welcome the first Stéfan Sinclair-CRIHN annual lecturer, Kim Martin.
Thank you, Michael. What?
Yep.
All good?
Yep.
Thank you so much. The arrows? Okay, thank you. It's an absolute honor to be here to speak for a day that's honoring someone who I greatly respected. You can tell I'm quite nervous, and it's going to be quite an emotional talk. I'm going to do my best not to cry, but I have tissues here, so we'll see how it goes. I last night spent some time looking at the land acknowledgements of Montreal, and it seems that there are quite a few different ones. So I am just going to say a very quick thank you for allowing us in this space where many different Indigenous communities have been over the course of history, and that I acknowledge these nations and that I am on unceded territory. Last night, very late last night, I did a series of tweets that links to different things and thanks different people that I talk about in this talk. And I did that because I always say I'm going to do it afterwards, and I never do. I just rush on doing the next thing. So if there's anything you're interested in, most of the links are on Twitter. And if you're not on Twitter, let me know and I will share after this. I've always been the kind of person who has too many things going on at once. Too many balls in the air, they say, as they wait for them to come crashing down. The sort of person who might say, buy a used school bus in the midst of her doctoral work and launch a collaborative, community-facing digital humanities makerspace while raising a son and working part-time at a local restaurant.
while also running an on-campus digital humanities speaker series and an off-campus digital humanities mix-up, while also co-hosting back camps and attending digital humanities conferences across the continent and sometimes beyond. You know, that kind of busy. I suspect, having known, communicated with, and studied other digital humanities scholars for almost a decade, that if you're listening to this, that you might be that kind of person too. I start with a long list of things I was busy doing from 2012 to 2016, not to brag or to complain, for these were some of the most exciting, inspiring years of my life, but to demonstrate just what it takes to make it in academia and to be part of this community we call digital humanities. When Michael Sinatra asked me if I would speak at this event, I teared up because it was in honor of Stéfan Sinclair, and I've teared up every time I've thought of him for the past year. I wasn't sure then, and I'm still not sure now, standing here in front of you, that I can do him justice. Stéfan represents to me everything that is good about digital humanities. And sorry for those of you watching from elsewhere, Canadian digital humanities in particular. His kindness knew no bounds. He was generous with his time and his knowledge. He looked after both graduate students and younger scholars that came behind him. And I count myself incredibly lucky to have been in both of those parts of my career, to have him there as a mentor, a colleague, and eventually as a friend. Stéfan and I had a few things in common besides the field in which we worked. We both loved to think about design, in particular ways to design tools for and beyond academia. We both loved to play, explore, and help others do the same, whether through programming or through hands-on making and creativity. And finally, we both love our Canadian digital humanities community and work hard to support it on a variety of levels. My title then, Seeing Things Through, is a reference not only to the most well-known tool amongst the DH community, at least, that Stéfan created, Voyant, but also to a series of lenses I'm going to ask you to consider over the next 30 minutes. Through his work with Jeffrey Rockwell on Voyant, Hermeneutica, and later Spiral, Stéfan asked us to look at our text in a new way, providing a lens for everyone from the absolute beginner to the experienced programmer to play with words. I'm going to use my own lived experiences to offer three lenses to you now as a way of inviting your own reflections about yourself and your role in the DH community or whatever other academic community you feel a part of. The first lens is that of a determined graduate student. In a short tale I'm calling Making Community, I will focus on some of the fun that Stéfan encouraged in my own career, reflecting on my time with the Maker Bus and getting to know the DH community. With the second lens, I'll return to the busyness I described in my opening remarks and reflect on my postdoctoral experience in what I'm calling labor practice. And finally, I'll provide the lens of the junior academic, because you always start again at the bottom, the first 2 years of my academic career as an assistant professor. Set amidst the current pandemic, this section is called Lessons in Reciprocity. I'll invite you to see through undergrad's eyes as a way of considering what the future of DH might look like. Stéfan is a character in each of these stories, providing pivotal support throughout with a perfect mix of curiosity and inspiration. In 2012, I was a doctoral student who had just attended her first THAT camp, the Humanities and Technology Camp, a DHM conference, and I was busy establishing myself on Twitter, where I learned most of what I know about digital humanities. One of my contacts, Ryan Hunt, tweeted that he and his partner, Beth, were moving from Korea to Southern Ontario to pursue graduate degrees. And I reached out to let him know that if he needed anything when he got to Western, I was there. I didn't think anything about it, and months passed, and I was attending a lecture on the future of higher education titled Digital Boon or Digital Doom. Chuckling to myself at such a ridiculous title, I tweeted Digital Boon or Doom, only to see Ryan tweet the exact same thing. That's odd, I thought, and quickly worked out that he must be in the room, for there couldn't be another talk with the same title. And a series of DMs led us to discover we were sitting but a row apart. After the talk, we chatted briefly. I met his partner, Beth. This was a simple chance encounter that would result in profound change over the course of the next 3 years of my life. Fast forward 2 weeks, and I'm in conversation with another graduate student trying to work out how we're going to afford to fly to DH in Nebraska. We're looking to driving. We see that a rental van for the 8 of us would be thousands of dollars for the trip. When he jokes, you could buy a bus for that money. Well, the very next day, I find myself in conversation with Ryan and Beth at yet another technology conference, hearing that they want to go to Nebraska as well. And an idea was born. We launched an Indiegogo campaign the next day to raise money to purchase a bus. We successfully, over the course of the next month, raised a whopping $2,900, and yes, managed to purchase a bus for that amount. Believe it or not, we did make it to Nebraska, though not in the bus. It turns out $1,900 that we spent on the bus means that it needs a lot of repairs before it can go out on the road. But we made it there. And as we walked around handing out Maker Bus buttons, trying to get people excited about the concept of a bus and taking DH into the public, I met Stéfan for the first time. His warm smile and infectious scheming led us to talk excitedly about future possibilities. A few months later, Stéfan and Ellen Liu invited the Maker Bus to join For Humanities, an advocacy initiative focused on showing the public the value of the humanities. We became the network's first mobile unit, and they supported us when we joined forces with the inimitable Alex Gill to attempt the Humanities Matter bus tour, a quest to travel across Canada and US, documenting our journey and talking with various humanities groups along the way. We launched another fundraising campaign and waited. Well, of course, we didn't just wait. We planned so many things. Again, Stéfan stepped up and asked us to start the tour in Montreal as part of the joint ACH-CSDH conference he was running with Michael, Cecily, and Dominic. We co-arranged, along with John Simpson, a maker camp for the children of our colleagues that would include 3D printing and various other arts and crafts. We eagerly set to work thinking of other ways we could use the bus to connect DH to the public. Visualization installations, visit yourself computer stations, 3D print your thesis advisor, you name it, we were on it. Until we weren't. We raised only $10,000 out of our $15,000 of funding and decided, sadly, let's call the whole thing off. Maker Bus continued. We ran maker camps at DHSI, we did teacher training, make-a-thons, made clothing fashion shows, family days. We developed a series of digital literacy modules with a local literacy foundation, and we ran after-school camps. We were busy. And although we put up a fight at the time against words like innovation, the Maker Bus was very much about thinking forward. We used the latest technologies such as drones, 3D printers, and augmented and virtual reality to try and rethink what education was, both for and well beyond the academic community. One of our most impactful events was when we were invited to work with Noki Kwe in London, an Indigenous organization devoted to teaching workplace skills. We pulled the bus up to their institution in a strip mall on the outskirts of town. And like many other organizations, they had given us little instruction and ultimately more trust than we likely deserved at the time. We had the bus set up with several technology stations, including one on podcasting. The adults present for the day's events stepped aboard the bus somewhat skeptically, intrigued by the concept of getting on a school bus, but perhaps distrustful, not only of unfamiliar technology, but also unknown faces. After a while, one woman sat down in our podcasting booth, which was really 2 bus seats turned to face each other, and asked what the microphone was for. So we explained a bit about podcasting and enthusiastically encouraged her to give it a go. Too shy, she was about to step away when Ryan slid into the booth across from her and showed her gently how to start recording and said he'd do it with her if she liked. Always the wizard with words, Ryan asked her, or began by asking her a bit about her and what she liked to do. I play darts, she said softly. Tell me more about that, Ryan asked. And she told him about her love of darts and how she played in many championships games and the many facts she knew about the sport. She talked straight for 10 minutes. Lost in conversation, she forgot the rest of us were there, just listening. And this was the magic of the Maker Bus. People came on board, found themselves in some of the technology we provided, tested the waters, and more often than not, they jumped right in. When their podcasting session wrapped up, this woman left the bus somewhat elated. And in chatting with us afterwards, I remember asking her what she liked about the podcasting. Well, no one has ever asked me what I liked before, she replied. I didn't think it mattered. This active listening that Brian prompted and the rest of us engaged in meant something to her. This very act, one that I am very grateful that you are currently doing, is something I think DH needs to do more. And I don't mean just exceptions like this when someone's standing in the front of the room or in a screen, but I mean a deeper listening, thinking about who the people are in our community. We should not only be asking, what do they do, but what do they need? And also perhaps, what could we accomplish together? Stéfan's work answered these questions. He built Doyen as a way of rethinking how we engage with the text. People read and speak many languages, and Stéfan made it possible to see through text written in many of those languages in many different formats, all from the comfort of your web browser. And perhaps because he knew people so well, or perhaps just because he enjoyed it, he made it fun. While we both loved to play, Stéfan's passion was for text, for code, for programming, and for language. My passion, if you can't tell by now, is understanding people. Specifically humanities scholars, yes, all of you, but also makers, and how they work and play together. In 2016, I completed my PhD and joined the University of Guelph as the second Michael Ridley postdoctoral fellow in the digital humanities. This position, jointly funded by the College of Arts and the McLaughlin Library, saw me building communities around DH at Guelph in the form of a speaker series, programming meetups, workshops, and the launch of a new DH Center, Hank Lab, alongside Susan Brown. Postdocs are interesting things. They are quite literally labor practice. They get you a foot in the door at an academic institution, perhaps on a research project or with focused time to complete, read, publish your own doctoral work. You practice being a researcher with little access to institutional coffers and less options for grant funding than folks on the tenure track. You often get to teach, but you get no training, something that is not always afforded to you over the course of your PhD. And you practice this form of labor on an unsuspecting group of undergrads. You attend meetings, practicing service, often with a department or a research group that is incredibly well-meaning, but knows that an investment in you does not always offer a great return because you are temporary. Perhaps more than most postdocs, I reflected on my role and position thanks to several wonderful humans I met, of course, on Twitter. As I invite you to see things through a postdoc's eyes, I speak for myself, but I hope to represent some other postdoctoral experiences so that DH as a field can learn to care a little bit more for these temporary positions. Hannah Alpert Abrams tweeted one day that she was looking to chat with other postdocs to hold each other accountable in the writing we were supposed to be doing. And several of us, including Heather Froelich, Amanda Heinrichs, Jim McGrath, and myself replied. We started a Slack group, Postdoctoral Laborers, and we attended conferences. And when we attended conferences, such as DH 2018 in Mexico, we held open meetings with other postdoctoral fellows to listen, to talk, and to commiserate. In 2018, tired of hearing about the one-year postdoc positions and seeing our peers move across the country to take them up, we started chatting about what we could do as a group to make change. To be very clear here, what happened next was led by Hannah, with Heather, Amanda, and Jim doing the majority of the writing. I was present in the start of discussions where ideas got pondered and did a read-through of the edit and edit of the results, but credit needs to go to these folks for the postdoctoral labor's Bill of Rights. We'll take a quick look at what this says. I won't read through them all, but I will highlight a couple. We needed to note that a postdoc is not a grad student position. For every one of us had been called grad students time and again when we held our postdoctoral positions. And that it is transitional, that people should expect that you are hired but are looking for work the entire time you're there, which has a deep effect on the psyche. We established that 1 year is not enough. Asking people to move across the country and give up everything they know to hold a 1-year position is, well, largely unfair. Up until we wrote this document and eventually published it on Humanities Commons, I had thought myself as nothing but lucky to have my position at Guelph, and I still consider it a great experience. However, I was speaking at the Digital Library Federation on my postdoc work in Think Lab, and I had 2 different librarians come up and say to me, why are you a postdoc? I do that work and I'm full-time hired, and I don't teach and I don't do my own research. So after more and more conversations, I began to realize that perhaps I was doing far too much for far too little. And the main result of this was that I had started to undervalue my own work. My thesis work had fallen to the wayside as I started new projects and began to build new communities. I left the MakerBus community and the digital humanities community at Western that I built and put my heart and soul into behind. And though one could argue that this is the natural ebb and flow of a career with new roles and new institutions, reflecting on this shift and just how quickly it all happened has led me to realize that I never, until quite recently, looked back. I just kept on going, hoping to move up the academic ladder. I never took the time to mourn the friendships, the working relationships, and the time spent making these connections or building these networks. So when you meet a postdoc from this point on, do me a favor and do what Stéfan would do. Drop them a line, make them feel welcome. And remember, although they likely feel lucky to have a job within the academy, that their time in that particular role is short and that they've left friends and family behind to make a go of it in their academic career. And they too don't have time to mourn. During all this work and thinking about my postdoctoral self, I still had to take on new projects. So during the projects, I found, looking back, that I was now making the same errors that I went into them with. I was still looking at them through the same lens as I had previously. I'm going to share an example of this research, part of my postdoctoral work in a public makerspace in Guelph. And I share it as a reflection on the project that was largely a failure, occasioned small successes, to remind us again of the importance of slowing down. One of the lingering pain points from my time at the MakerBus was the way it forced me to think about my own gender. As a woman in an unpaid job that focused on technology, it would take more than all the digits on my hands and toes, my hands and feet, to name the times I was overlooked, overshadowed, or simply ignored because of my appearance. A few quick examples. After 2 years of working on the MakerBus, which was run by myself, Ryan, and Beth, seen there, we received our first paycheck, one to support the bus to go back into the repairs we've been paying for, and it came from a local literacy program that was led by a woman, and from what I could tell, only employed other women. The check, which should have brought delight, brought confusion and some pain, because it was addressed not to the MakerBus, even though we were a nonprofit at the time, but to Ryan Hunt and Associates. Walking into a local library to set up a makerstation for the day, I was carrying a 3D printer to set up. I was with Beth, who followed behind with a box of printed objects and our sign. We were excited and delighted to be there when not one, not two, but 3 different library staff all asked who we were going to get us to help, or who we were going to get to help us set up the 3D printer, only to be astonished that we could do it ourselves. In 2015, the MakerBus attempted to set a world record for the most people holding hands. The local newspaper who had interviewed us sent a photographer over to my house to take some photos. We took some on the bus, some outside, when all of a sudden the photographer scurried away, came back 5 minutes later with this glowing orb. He asked us if there were somewhere darker that we could go to do a photo shoot. Intrigued, we all moved into my basement, where he pulled Ryan aside and asked him to hold this ball in his hands to take a photo of only Ryan. By this point in our collaboration, we had spoken about gender bias many times, and Ryan tried his very best to say no and to insist that we should all be in the shot. The photographer kind of sat back and flicked through the photos on his camera and said, well, he doesn't have anything that would make the front page yet. So eventually we relented. He took this shot and proudly proclaimed to Ryan, I kid you not, that's the one, you're the man. And this was the image and the headline that made the newspaper the following day. Beth and I had been quite literally othered. I tell you these stories not for sympathy. This happens all the time in the tech world, but so you can understand why I took on my next project. The Diversity Project, DIY. So named so because it was a SHRC Partnership Engage grant, partnered with Diode, a local makerspace, whose goal was to broaden the membership through addition of women and LGBTQ members. Having visited 20+ makerspaces with my time with the Maker Bus, I was well aware this project was going to be a challenge. But I had a community partner with interested members. Eva, who was the director of the makerspace, and Michael, a longtime member who saw the need for change and was the first person to reach out with me with this idea. And Lori, a woman who made good use of the makerspace's woodshop and had offered to run workshops for us. It seemed we were off to a flying start when the grant funds were awarded in 2018. I hired Rashmi Kaur, an undergrad in biomedical sciences with a background in the arts, as an RA on the project, which quickly became as much her project as it was mine. The two of us set out with a number of goals. We were going to conduct multi-method feminist ethnography of women and LGBTQ makers. We were going to grow and reshape the membership of one makerspace. And we were going to try to develop a series of best practices for other maker communities. We plan to do all of this through a series of workshops and open houses, specifically targeted at women and queer communities. The workshops, largely supported with money for the grant, were low cost at $10 a pop, and participants learned a skill such as 3D design, woodworking, working with a laser cutter, and they went home with a self-made project. I also managed to get SHRC to kick in some funding for childcare. No one ever took me up on this. The open houses were often craft-based, and we supplied all the materials. So we thought we were set. All people had to do was show up. But this was easier said than done. No matter where we advertised, the open houses were, more often than not, 5 participants or less. This wasn't always a bad thing because we got to know some people really well. And some of them were indeed truly looking for a community. The workshops often filled up with 10 to 12 people, and these women really seemed to be excited to come into the space. We thought that they would come back. However, to our knowledge, not one of the women that came for the workshops ever came back to Diode outside of this time, and certainly never became a member, which was our overall goal. As Rashmi has noted in a piece that is currently out for publication, reflecting on all of this now, I understand why these participants could not see themselves as part of Diode, or at least not on their own. Diode failed to make their community presence known. Our cluster of participants and and workshop leaders existed in their own kind of protective bubble on Thursday nights. We were a community that we made for ourselves, and when this community left with us as we walked out the door. Reflecting on what we've largely seen as a failure, Rashmi and I have put together some thoughts on what we could possibly improve. I'll highlight them briefly here. First of all, it's not a surprise, but it needs to be said. Women largely undervalue their time. I wrote a grant to pay women to run workshops for other women, and it was so difficult to pay them. I ended up literally having to sit them down and make them understand what their time was worth, because even though they had spent their lives building up these skills, they often thought that they should just do it for free. It was part of a community. was convincing two women at the shop that their labor should be valued. Both of these women create artwork in the wood shop and with a laser cutter at Diode. One of them, since the project, and partly from her own words, as a result of it, has launched a small business for herself and is doing very well. And the other has renegotiated all the costs of her art pieces, recognizing the time and labor that goes into them. The second major concern for us was that there was an accessibility problem at Diode. There were steps to get into the building. And despite there being a wood shop upstairs, no one built a ramp to overcome this barrier. A student from the university who uses a wheelchair frequently attended our open houses with us. And despite Rashmeet's asking for help to build a ramp in the Slack space channel repeatedly, no one would help us. While we were more than happy to help the student in the space, this is not access. And in retrospect, we probably should have just got trained on the tools and insisted on building one ourselves. But this is one of the places we were hoping to be met halfway. Another reason things fell through at Diode brings me back to the theme of this talk, the need to slow down. I had what felt like a million things on the go when we launched the diversity project and was usually only in the space for one evening a week. Unlike my time on the maker bus, which was basically a full-time position, I was busy doing all my other postdoctoral work while trying to build community at Diode. Rashmeet was paid for all of her time on the project and did her very best to recruit participants and new members. But in the end, I feel I failed her too. For it was only when we were writing the paper and reflecting on the project that it came to light that one evening that I wasn't able to be present, Rashmeet and another student were subjected to a series of offensive remarks from an older man who was a member at Diode. I had realized that he stopped coming to our events at one point, but I wasn't sure why, and I never clued in. And Rashmeet, having felt that she handled the situation, though it clearly continued to haunt her, had felt that she had dealt with it, and hadn't wanted to bother me with it. I realized then that we weren't in regular enough communication. We were moving much too quickly. So quickly, in fact, that the very forms of harassment we were trying to build up a community against were diminished to the point of being an afterthought. The main lesson I learned here is that having too many things on the go can not only exhaust you, but can cause harm to those for whom you care. I learned too late to alter the course of this project, because as the pandemic settled in, we were unable to complete it as we would have liked. We didn't get to do DH in public or build community, at least one that outlasted us. But having Rashmeet work with me on this project has taught me so much more than she'll ever know. Pro tip, get yourself some undergrad collaborators and pay them well. This brings me to the final lens I'll ask you to look through today, that of undergrads. In 2019, I found out that the University of Guelph was going to be hiring a tenure track digital humanities scholar. As the current postdoc, I knew I had a good chance at the role, but I also knew that there were many amazing people who I'd be up against. As I worked with Susan and others at Guelph to run Think Lab and to begin the planning of a new DH-inspired undergraduate program, quite literally my dream job, I had to think carefully about how to present myself and what I could offer Guelph. I look back at the things I'd done at that point, the Maker Bus, DH at Western, DH at Guelph, Diode, Think Lab, and decided that the common thread was indeed community. I wrote my job talk to showcase community building as a skill. And this was a risk, I knew, because academic hiring committees like to see things on the page, books and journal articles, lots of funding, etc. And thanks to the excellent mentorship of my PhD advisor, Annabelle von Haas, I had some of those as well. But if I was going to be hired at Guelph, I wanted to get the position for something I knew I would enjoy doing, building community. As part of the interview process, we were asked to teach a tool to an audience of a DH tool to an audience of non-technical folk. I bet you can guess what I chose. Voyant. I've never taught with a tool that is so immediately engaging as Voyant, something that lets you play right away, dive deeper where and how you want to, and to follow your own path as you investigate your texts. I wrote to Stéfan to let him know this is what I was doing. And this was his response. My very best wishes to you for the Guelph position. I actually do very much believe in luck when it comes to landing positions in this job market. And if Doyen can contribute a little bit of pixie dust, so much the better. I'll do a bit of cleaning up the server this evening to curry favor from the owl deities. Well, he must have asked nicely, because the owl deities did indeed smile on me that day. And as you can tell from my title slide, I have the immense honor of attaining a CT position at the University of Guelph. And as it turns out, one of those amazing people I was up against was hired too. So I have the privilege of full-time work and a wonderful colleague and friend in Paul Barrett. Together, Paul, Susan, and I have built the Culture and Technologies program, an undergrad major and minor at Guelph, which sees students learning new DH skills, theory, and method from their very first year forward. And we envision, in combination with another major or minor, or through one of our 3 streams seen here. And while there'll be plenty of time in the future for us to tell you more about CTS, I would like to spend the remaining time touching on another subject, teaching during a pandemic, and how it has changed my pedagogy and quite possibly me as a person. In the summer of 2019, my then chair, Sophie LaChapelle, was about to launch a university-wide course on pandemics for alumni and undergraduate students. And she was looking for something to do, or someone to do something similar, but smaller, just for the history department. I jumped at this opportunity because I'd been working with undergrads that summer, collecting art being made during the pandemic. And I thought there was really something to having students be able to communicate online at a time that they were all trapped in their bedrooms. I managed to launch the course and called it Contextualizing COVID-19, an archive for the future. The archive was my spin on this. It was a place that the students could contribute materials that would one day serve as primary sources about the experience that we're all going through at the moment. The course had 15 guest lectures from all different periods of history, and the students got to learn about pandemics past and how they dealt and learned, how people at the time dealt and learned with their own situations. Many of these lectures, particularly in fall 2019, were difficult for the students. I insisted that they kept their cameras off if it made them feel comfortable, that they could step away if it was too much. But many of them noted that it was vital in helping them understand the place of COVID-19 in the larger history of disease and illness. We used Slack for discussion in this class, and the students worked in groups to discuss what they wanted to add to the archive, what they thought best represented them, and what would be important for historians in the future. The archives that form the backbone of this class were built in the Canadian Writing Research Collaboratory, or QUIRC, which allowed the students to have either group or individual pages, in addition to uploading a variety of materials, images, videos, photos, documents to the collection, all of course with proper metadata. The first class worked together in groups to discuss on their final projects. And while some students kept it light and talked about their obsession with Animal Crossing or the importance of social media and maintaining friendships, others dove into topics that they had personal experience with: homelessness, anti-Asian hate, police violence, and other forms of systemic racism. The second time I taught the class, students developed their own pages for the archive based on a template by my URA, Thomas Smith, which incorporated questions the class had developed for themselves, in addition to a photo, a document, or a visualization that they felt shared their experiences. These are a few of the questions. There are about 20 in all, and the students had the option to answer these. There was no mandatory answers. The link is shared on Twitter, but I'll share it again in the chat. And you can go and read all of these answers. And I think you'll be quite moved by how open and willing students were to contribute their time and their personal lives during COVID to this. Both times I taught this class, I began it with an exercise that I had started thinking about just after reading Generous Thinking by Kathleen Fitzpatrick. While I read this book, I felt I was unable to make instrumental change across the university. I did think I could bring a small sense of generosity into the classroom. I asked the students, few of whom knew each other, and many of whom were in different countries and different time zones, particularly in the first course, to consider first, in the very first day, what it meant to be generous. To be kind, they'll often start with, to listen, to share, the kinds of things that off the top of your head you think about when you think about generosity. And without a doubt, someone would say to give without the expectation of anything in return. Next, I'll shift their thinking to the virtual classroom, where their ideas get a little bit more concrete. Be respectful to others, recognize disparity, come to the class prepared, etc. Then, ever so gently, I push back on the need to give without expectation. I ask them if they should or would continue to come to class prepared if no one else bothered. If they share their notes, if they should share their notes, their ideas, and their thinking freely without expecting that others would do the same. I think you can see what I'm doing here. I'm shifting from generosity to reciprocity. In the end, we come up with a list that looks much like these. These are all the students' words that I collect on the first day, list out for them, get rid of duplicates, and put up in our main Slack page. We use these lists as a basis for communications with each other throughout the term, a sort of contract. It sets out the right tone. It shows mutual respect. It lets people think about their role in the classroom, and it highlights the need to care, not only for each other, but for themselves. This was particularly useful in a time when we were trapped in our rooms, unsure of when lockdown would end or when we'd go back to normal. What resulted in the 2 virtual contextual COVID classes was quite different from what happened when I've done this exercise in an in-person class. Several students referred back to the contract throughout the term, indicating that it made them think a little differently about how much they were contributing, that they would stop and listen if they thought they had spoken enough, or sometimes too much. 2 students of color thanked me personally for starting the class with that experience, as it helped them feel comfortable speaking up about their own lived experience, knowing that there was an open dialogue and an expectation of respect. One student even came out to her Slack group, of which they knew I was a part, as bisexual. I think that anonymity played a role here, as I never saw the student's face, and as far as I know, neither did any of the others. But I know that we were the very first people they told, and that by the end of the term, they had also told their parents, who thankfully were supportive. I learned so much from these students about being human, as they learned to comprehend the death and disaster through a historical lens, and I learned that from both myself and my colleagues in the history department. I hope that someone in the future learns from the time they spent on their archives as well. A short conclusion, if I can have a few minutes of more moments of your time. Speaking of time, it's one of the most used words that pops up when I put the text of this talk into Voyant. It surprised me a little bit. I expected community and of course, Stéfan's name to appear. But when I look back through the 3 different lenses I brought you through today, it made sense. It brought to mind one of my favorite novels, On Beauty, by Zadie Smith, where she starts out by quoting a poem by her husband, Nick Laird. Here's the quote. In the novel, I think this quote speaks largely to family and to the importance of spending time with them. But I also think it can speak to the amount of time we spend on the work that we do as scholars, and to the remarkable privilege and responsibility that come with being able to spend our time on something so incredible. Stéfan's tech chops and research acumen will be highlighted by more of his colleagues this afternoon. But for me, his memory speaks to the recognition of the many types of labor involved in DH, from the careful nature of programming and building to the nurturing of future generations of our community. Building community, like Stéfan did, and like I and many others in DH continue to do, takes time. It is a labor, but it is one of love. Stéfan ran out of time much too early, but his love lives on in each of us who he supported through his work on CSDH, the Association for Computers and the Humanities, and beyond. And for myself, I've got a couple of things to see through that I believe will help bring about the Stéfan, or the DH Stéfan might have envisioned. To begin with, I am, ever so quietly while the world is in pain of a pandemic, putting measures in place to launch a new Humanities Matter tour in Stéfan's name. I'll be looking for some adventurous grad students to help out this time round, as well as some DH folks with love to spare to get in on the fun. So get in touch if that sounds like you. But for now, thank you for your time.